Warning! This video contains adult content not suitable for children.
Warning! If you remember what that sound effect is from, you're probably older than I am and possibly a pervert. So there you go. Welcome everyone to my show, Truth Seekers. Hello YouTube, how are you? Full disclaimer, you're probably gonna hear some truths tonight that are a little foreign to you and might even sound a little bit unpopular. And those are two compelling reasons to make sure you listen very closely. Now, if you look here, you see the video of Daniel Shaver. This is a year ago that he was shot, January 18th, 2017, a year ago today. And that's in Mesa, Arizona, my hometown. I know exactly where that hotel is, next to Fiesta Mall. I've been there numerous times, twice for traffic school and one or two other times for stuff. Doesn't matter. This is the most needless, avoidable event I've seen in a long time that just makes me seethe when I look at it. Literally just rage inside. I can't believe it. There's no justification what happened to this poor guy. There's no justification for his wife and family trying to fill the emotional void and put the pieces together, for his kids growing up in a world where their father's gone. For this, like, there's definitely no justification for what the police officer did. This is murder. Now, I've read and listened to I believe sincere arguments that support the police, typically from law officers, about training, about split-second decisions, about gut instinct. But I got to be honest, with the body cam video not provided, we might never know the truth. And the truth is, the only question that matters is, can you justify taking a life in the moment that you pull the trigger? In this case, Officer Phil Mitch Brailsford certainly can't, in my opinion. And he had a poor record of bad judgment to boot. Now, what happened to Daniel Shaver was not fair. And now with the benefit of hindsight, we can pinpoint what would have stopped this raging psychopath with a badge and and a laser etched semi-automatic weapon that said you're effed on the side of it from ever showing up at his hotel. And after Officer Brailsford showed up, he was effed, let's be honest. Now, we can't always protect ourselves from the unpredictable. Well, all we can do is learn from the experience and let our judgment be honed and refined as a result. As a father and a husband, I know I can't protect my kids from everything, but we can learn from this and say, how could we have prevented it? What was the chain reaction, the domino effect that led to this? And in my wise estimation, the Pence Rule would have saved Daniel Shaver's life, period. Allow me to provide evidence for this. Now, if you were familiar with the argument that went on when the Pence Rule came to light, it was mocked mercilessly. It was described in the news as prudish, misguided, wrong-headed, stupid, misogynistic, discriminatory, etc. et al. I've got 20 links that I saved, all describing it with a different moniker. It's hilarious. The Pence Rule is not unique to Pence, however. I think people would be surprised how many people practice it for reasons other than the ones that are described. Myself and my family, we practice it, my wife and I, because it's a guardrail against unintended, unforeseen consequences. Bad things happen when you break the rules. G.K. Chesterton said, if you break the big rules, you get the small rules. All right? This one for me is a big rule. The Pence Rule is important because mainly it works. Let's look at a couple pieces of evidence here. I want to start with our good friend Kirsten Powers and a tweet that she sent out describing the Pence Rule. She said, quote, if you're a man who can't be alone with a woman without sexually assaulting or harassing or fondling or rubbing up against or masturbating in front of her, then you need psychological help. The Pence Rule cannot help you or any woman. I beg to differ. And why do we even have to argue? Let's keep in mind, this is a woman who was voluntarily, romantically involved with Anthony Weiner. Anthony, text me maybe, Weiner. Freaking beans. The assumption that the Pence Rule exists for the same reason as Burka is hilarious. Like, who's she talking to here? The assumptions, who knows? Look, we all have our own perceptions and reasons why this is a good rule and a bad one, but I want to show you another critique from Pathos, whatever. Make fun of me, I can't say it. I'm still right about the Pence Rule. As many critics of the Pence Rule have said, it's pretty sad when the only thing preventing men from abusing women are witnesses. Again, this assumption that without the Pence Rule, rape, which in Hollywood is kind of true, and Washington, D.C., kind of true. While conservatives might find it admirable that men like Mike Pence go out of their way to avoid any hint of scandal, I do, but I think it's a character and a virtue thing. If those are conservative, then so be it. And as a politician, one can't blame him for that, right? Well, scandals don't help conservatives on their resume. His personal policy has disturbing implications, problematic implications. It paints men as slaves to their sexual urges and women as lustful sirens, leading them to destruction. No, you're doing that. not not the Pence Rule. It also shows a lack of trust in marital relationships, and if you're so paranoid that your spouse might cheat on you or worse, if left alone with someone of the opposite sex, you don't need a special rule. You need couples counseling. I would argue if you need couples counseling, you also need a special rule. But maybe that's not why the rule is in place. Maybe that's not the purpose at all. Now, I found 50 other critiques, like I mentioned: sexist, misguided, discriminatory, pragmatic, sensible, enlightened. Wise. Wait, what are we talking about here? Look, if you take the emotion and the partisanship completely out of this, you need to ask yourself a question. All those bad names aside, would we trade any of those things to get Daniel Shaver back, to bring his life back to us? Would I be willing to live in a way that would keep Officer Filthy Phil Brailsford from showing up at my place with his "your F" tool drawn and cocked, doing his best Jigsaw "do you want to play a game" impression? Because that's kind of what happened here. Let me put him back on screen. So let's talk about the Pence Rule. Let me explain my argument here, for lest some of you call me silly and naive. Now, there were 3 critical things that happened the night Daniel Shaver was shot that directly contributed to his death. 2 of them have to do with the Pence Rule. Number 1, alcohol. Part 1. Daniel Shaver had been drinking. The police officer did ask him if he'd been drinking. Daniel said yes, but also told him that he could understand the directions he was given. From the evidence that I've seen, I would say this was absolutely not the case, because he was drunk. Is drinking a crime? No, obviously. Is it worthy of death? No, absolutely not. Do hundreds of thousands of people get killed and lose their life every year as a result of drinking? Yes. 2 things can be true at once. Would Daniel Shaver still be alive if he wasn't buzzed? I believe he would. Share the fate of his female companion, Monica Portillo, who we watched crawl away on all fours, traumatized and terrified by a psychopath with a gun, but still alive to live. Oh, sorry, I got to pause it there. Still alive to speak in his day of court. That's part 1, the alcohol part. For those of you who don't know what the Pence Rule is, you don't drink alcohol at events or when your wife is not around. And number 2, you do not find yourself alone with a woman who is not your spouse. So part 2 is the opposite sex. Female companionship. Daniel Shaver invited a woman to his room that was not his wife. That's a mistake. He was traveling on business. You could say he met her at the bar before inviting up to the room. Totally harmless. She was with a coworker at the time who was a male. Okay, can't argue about that. We can only assume the intent of someone who invites a woman to his room who isn't his wife while he's drinking. Fair enough? The male friend had retired to his own room before the police arrived. That's a Pence Rule brace, 2 for 2, for those of you counting at home. Now, does this happen every day in the real world with no immediate consequences? Yes. I traveled for a living for a long time. I've seen it a long time, and I've seen the consequences that don't always happen, but often do. Daniel Shaver may have been in the habit of doing this. I don't know. The long-term effects are undesirable and manifest how wisdom sounds sententious until the tragedy actually strikes. Now, third element, pointing the gun. Right? This doesn't fall into the Pence Rule, but it's important to know that the Pence Rule influences, right? Monica Portillo said that Shaver invited her and her coworker, Luis Nunez, into his room for drinks. Portillo said that she sat on the bed as the 2 men played with Shaver's pellet rifle looking through the scope. Now, I'm going to read a quote from Portillo. It says, "There are people downstairs. So I was like, hey, you guys, don't be so close to the window. People might get the wrong idea." Which is exactly what happened. And by the way, trained and responsible gunners know this is a horrible idea and extremely poor judgment. I don't know if Monica Portillo owns a gun, but she obviously had that part figured out. You can argue that Daniel was just drinking to relax at the end of a long day, or that he may have been trying to impress this new woman, which is my assumption, or that the drinks were to take her edge off and maybe help him make the most of this opportunity, seeing as Luis had already left the room. I don't know which one it was. All I know is that Daniel Shaver doesn't break the Pence Rule. Police never show up at his hotel room that day. If any one of those 3 things doesn't happen, and I think 1 and 2 contributed to 3, he's still alive today. If he had known that, maybe he would have made a different decision. But that's the thing. We don't know until after we make the decision unless we think beforehand about the consequences that we'll undertake, which is what we can learn from this. Look, in his situation, I travel all the time. Netflix, spa, room service, anything but alcohol and flesh and blood woman in your hotel room. I mean, that combination is like, you remember 1989's Batman where the Joker was poisoning people? And the Batman's like, the poison only works when the components are mixed. hairspray won't do it alone, but hairspray mixed with lipstick and perfume would be toxic and then traceable. That's the Pence Rule. Any of those things on their own, not a big deal. Mix them together and you get the perfect toxic combination and bad things happen. Usually nothing this bad. But again, by the time this dude shows up to the hotel room, it's out of his control because he surrendered control to someone else. And in this case, horrible, horrible person. In fact, his impaired and poor judgment is now confronted with a government cultural marriage of bad judgment and limited accountability in the form of a psycho, personified by a psychopath wearing a badge. Daniel Shaver unwittingly allowed this to happen through bad judgment, and all we can do now is lament it, mourn it, hope it never happens again, and learn from it ourselves. We should remember that we only choose our actions. The consequences are not for us to decide. So judge early and judge often. It's the most twisted game of demonic twister I've ever seen. This guy's a monster. God bless your soul, kid.
Hold on him. One with me.
It's outrageous.